Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Um, we're going to get into the American Revolution today. Actually, this week. So, the one question you should be asking, the one question you should think about, if you haven't thought about, start thinking about, is why? Why was there American Revolution? Why did it happen? Etc. Etc. Now, you're going to read a lot in your textbook, and you're going to do some activities over these next 2 weeks where you're going to have to flush that out. But I want to start by giving you the kind of down dirty quick version of the 5 different interpretations, the 5 different kind of concepts most historians play with about why it happened. Why these people, these English colonists, these people who saw themselves as English, wanted to break away. So here they are. We'll do it in 2 parts so that your browser works quicker. But 1 is going to be cultural, 2 economic, 3 political, 4 intellectual, and 5 imperial. These are the 5 explanations we're going to work with. First off, cultural. Um, the buzzword you want is Americanization. There was this belief, or there's this belief by some historians, that there had formed a true, specific person called an American by this time that didn't consider themselves English, actually consider themselves something different based on 2 things. One is a concept called therapy of distance. This idea that there's an entire Atlantic Ocean and it takes 3 months to cross this thing. And that the colonists were so separated from England that they started developing in their own way, self-reliant, independent, individuals, problem solving. You've heard all these terms used to describe an American. This is where the concept kind of comes from. The other part is that they're in a very different landscape, a very different place, a very different culture. Um, this is an area where a lot of them are living out on the frontier. Um, Violence was survival on the frontier. There were wild animals, there were Indians. You walked around with a gun. That's not something you did in England. You hunted. Only the rich hunted in England. Plus, you could go anywhere you want. You could move anywhere you want. You were mobile, and you were allowed to be mobile, and you could own land, and land was plentiful. All these things that are not in England. And the idea is that these are going to cause a very different mindset. Um, so, the argument here is as the Revolutionary War approached, that there a unique American consciousness formed, and so that the revolution was actually about a different culture, a different people altogether, breaking away from someone they no longer felt related to. We have an issue with that in the sense that still most of these people call themselves English. But number 2, the economic. And the economic we need to kind of divide in 2 parts because you've got 2 different, well, you've got many, like 8, but essentially 2 different economies. You've got a southern economy who is very much kind of single crop agriculture, exportation. And you've got a northern economy who is much more involved in kind of merchant trade. We're going to need to look at both. And first, we have to deal with the restrictions on trade. See, when England set up their colonies, not just in North America, but in the Caribbean, in India, in Africa, wherever they set them up, the idea is they want to control the trade coming from those colonies to Europe, and it has to go through England. So they set up these things called the Navigation Acts. You came across this in your text. 1661 were the first Navigation Acts. They said all commerce had to be conducted by English ships, that certain goods could only be traded with Britain, but regardless, any goods had to flow through Britain. So if the good comes from the colony into Britain, then out of Britain to somewhere else, they get taxed on the way in, they get taxed on the way out. Britain controls the flow of all of this stuff and the taxes on all of this stuff. It makes sense. Colonies were thought of something that was set up to support the mother country. Well, um, some of these got a little ridiculous. My favorite is the Hat Act. That's 1732. It abolished hat-making industry in the colonies. Do you know what they made hats out of at the time? You know, those tri-corner thing, right? You go to, like, I don't know, Sturbridge Village or wherever, and you get the little tricorner hats, and you think you're really cool. They were made out of beaver pelts. Where'd the beaver come from? Yeah, okay. Beaver comes from North America. They catch the beaver, they get the beaver pelts, they process the beaver pelts, then they send it over to England. It is made into hats, then shipped back, and that's how you buy your hat. It's a lot of travel for not a lot of necessity. Anyways, regardless, the one thing about these navigation acts is you could kind of get around them. You could kind of bribe the right guy and kind of get through. And in places like Boston and Philadelphia and New York, it was actually somewhat acceptable, semi-respected, not highly respected, but semi-respected to be a smuggler. So for a while you could get around it. The problem is, in the 17, or shoot, yeah, in the 1760s, 1770s, they start to crack down on this. But even if they hadn't cracked down, these merchants knew that they could make a lot more money if they could ship straight to France, or the Netherlands, or Spain. They could make amazing amounts more money, maybe twice as much money. Alright, so you've got this motivation of the North. The South was a little different situation. You had those large plantation owners. Think mainly those big plantation owners in Virginia. We talked about those with Bacon's Rebellion, but also in South Carolina, these huge plantation owners. And remember, they were trying to keep that system of deference. They bought the nicest things. They had to have the highest fashions, the best furniture in their home. Right? They had to keep up that image. Well, when we look at their accounts, what we find is these guys were massively in debt. What happened is they shipped their tobacco over to England, usually actually to Scotland, usually to Glasgow. That's where most of it was coming in. And instead of the merchant sending them money back, they would run them a tab. And when you sent your tobacco over, you send it over with a list of stuff you want. And he would go around, he'd buy all your stuff that you wanted, and he would send it back, and he'd just run you a tab. Well, on lean years, when the tobacco wasn't pulling a lot of money, when the prices had dropped, these guys kept spending. And the merchants that were running them a tab just ran them debt. It's like they had this big credit card. They just kept spending, spending, and spending. And at some point, you spend so much that you're paying more on the interest, and then you can't keep up, etc. That's what was happening to these guys. Some of these guys were so far in debt. In fact, most of these guys, to be honest, were so far in debt that it would have taken them 40 years to get out if they didn't buy anything else. If they just bought the food, their basics, and nothing else. No luxuries of any type. If they didn't buy anything, it would have taken them 40 years to get out of debt. This is the majority of plantation owners in South Carolina and Virginia, especially Virginia. What happens if you become your own country? You don't have to pay this debt. You don't have to pay these English merchants who are controlling you. So, the economic theory is that revolution was actually purely done for economic reasons. That these leaders of the revolution, the leaders, by the way, were Virginia, South Carolina plantation owners and merchants from Boston, Philadelphia, New York. These were the leaders of the revolution. That they did it for their economic reasons. The North, to be able to trade freely with other countries for higher profits. The South, the Southern gentry, to get out of debt. So it's actually debt and the desire for free trade that was actually the cause of the revolution. Third actually was the political idea. The thing is, in all 13 colonies, what had formed for various different reasons is some kind of colonial assembly. Think like a Congress, a small Congress in the colony. Well, Virginia had the House of Burgesses. Hartford had their own. New Haven had their own. All of them had it. Well, the problem is, in 1688, there was something called the Glorious Revolution, where they threw out the King of England. The English threw out the King of England. They brought in a new king. This is actually William and Mary. You've heard of these people. Um, and when they did, in the time before William and Mary could put new governors in charge of each of these colonies, those colonial assemblies overthrew. They kicked out the governor and seized power and control of the colony themselves. And the idea was, if they did that, maybe William and Mary would agree with them, they'd work with them, we threw out the old regime. Well, it kind of worked. When these new governors from William and Mary came in, they actually negotiated with the colonial assemblies. Um, and they gave them the right to control taxation within the colonies. So you got these colonial assemblies who claim they have this right of taxation, that claim they are the ones who kind of control this. And then, once you get close to the Revolution and Parliament is instating all these taxes, the English Parliament over control all this, is instating all these taxes, these colonial assemblies are saying, actually, no, that is our right. That is our ability. So the argument here is that the Revolutionary War wasn't anything about culture. There's nothing American about it. It's not economics. They're not these leaders concerned. It's actually that there was this political struggle between Parliament and these various little colonial assemblies, arguing over who has the most power. And that was the revolution. And there's two more.